Hello everyone, good evening, welcome back to the Red Path. My name is Dara and I'm going to be here with you for this lovely evening talking about the points. The points for Warhammer 40,000 10th edition, specifically the World Eaters. It's been a week, it's been a lot of there's been a lot of interesting discussion on the internet about points, about how the format of the game is changing into something that maybe we're a little bit less than familiar with. The word power level is being thrown around a lot, maybe accurately describing the state of the game that we're going into. But before we get into everything, hello everyone in chat, I have you here on my right. We've got Stream Elements up and running, we've got Warboss keeping an eye on chat. Rory, I see you in there. What's up, homie? If you're just joining us, please feel free to say hello in chat. I imagine it's going to get a little bit busy as the stream goes on. So if you want my full and undivided attention about a burgeoning, very important question, hit us up with a super chat. Or if you just want to support the channel in general, super chats are the way to do it. But this is going to be a rather interesting stream. Over the next 2 hours or so, we're going to break it up into two different segments. The first segment, we're going to review the World Leader points in general. And in the second segment, I am going to actually be deep diving into a series of lists which were presented to me throughout the day. So we've got lists from the community, namely people from Discord who kind of reacted to my message or whatever and sent me lists. So if you're not already in the Discord, it's a perfect time to join if you want a way to influence Red Path videos and streams going forward. We've got some really funny lists that we're going to look at. I'm going to do a bit of an analysis on it. So this whole stream, while it is coming at things from a more competitive stance, we are going to touch on a little bit more like of your casual match play kind of scenarios and everything like that. But yeah, it's going to be fun. Let's see how chat's going on. What up, El? Good to see you. Luke, hello. Rory, hello. It's great to see everyone in chat. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk a little bit before we kind of dive into the specific points. Let's talk about how things have changed, because the format for points now is a little bit different. Unit composition has changed an awful lot, and a lot of people are talking about this. So I think it warrants discussion. So there's really two aspects to this. The first could be considered to be a lesser aspect is the fact that units, by and large, are restricted to blocks of models now. So you've got things like berserkers, for example, and the new berserker unit you can only take in units of 5 or 10. There's no more 8-man berserker squads or anything in between like that. So that's a rather interesting change. We have to ask ourselves, is this a good change? I think my point of view, I think this isn't a great change for the game, because there was a lot of nuance in specifically sized squads. So the way that I was always kind of leaning towards running my berserkers, at least the units that I wanted to get a lot of hitting power out of in the previous edition, I really liked an 8-man squad, because it felt like you weren't overcommitting to anything. You didn't have too much redundancy. But now we can't really do those things anymore, and to be honest, I'm not a fan of this change. As I say, you can either end up overcommitting or undercommitting with 5-man, 10-man berserker units. You've got 10 to 20 jackal units. One of the places I think it really stings is the 8-band, specifically for us. Now, I was a big fan of running 4 or 5-man 8-band squads towards the end of 9th edition. Currently, as it stands, you can either take 3 or 6. Now, I was never really a fan of the 3-man 8-band squad, because I always thought their damage output wasn't reliable enough. It didn't have the numbers. And a 6-man always felt too much like a large points investment. Unfortunately, now, you don't really have a choice. You have to take one or the other of these. You can't have a 4 or a 5-man anymore. So I must say, this is something that I'm not really that happy with. And essentially, what it means is that you're kind of forced into committing a lot of points into these big units, which overall reduces your board coverage as well, because you're either taking loads and loads of small units, which 10th edition seems to be kind of encouraging you not to do, by and large, with the advent of leaders and things like that. Or the other option is that you take these like really big squads where you can put your leaders in, but your board coverage diminishes, meaning your ability to control the game, control the flow of the game, is reduced. So I personally am a crazy big fan of this new squad size thing. Let's see what chat kind of thinks about it. Jamie, you're there. What's up, homie? Good to see you. Iron Dan, 4-man squads were the optimum size for 8-band, definitely. Harrison, you think it's a bad change as well? Also ran 4-man 8-band. Yep. It's kind of rough, I think. What does everyone else think? Let me know in chat if I'm overreacting to this or if it makes sense. But yeah, to me anyway, that's it. Kind of reads a little bit strange in terms of like you're taking away a little bit of the player agency in terms of, you know, if you're a thematic world leader player and you like to run your 8-man berserker squads, you can't do it anymore. So I can't say that that I'm a crazy fan of that. But that's not really the worst part, for want of a better word, about how these changes have kind of come about. The worst thing, in my opinion, is all war gear is now free for everyone, not just world leaders, for everyone. So before we get into it, we ran this simulation in Arcs of Omen with Space Marines. We gave them free war gear, and we saw what happened. Rats with meltaguns was a phrase that was thrown around a lot regarding the Space Marines, and I think it was actually a fair statement to say that inevitably what happens in conditions where there is free war gear, even going into 10th edition where they're trying to really push this idea of specialized weapons and specialized squads and stuff, inevitably what happens is one weapon type or one loadout is just so clearly better at its task than everything else that you never see anything else. If it's all free, then it's all worth the same amount of things. But it's very apparent that a lot of this war gear isn't equal, you know? For example, you take a Terminator squad, a World Leaders Terminator squad. You have combi bolters and you have combi weapons. One of them does devastating wounds, and one of them is just a bolter that fires a lot of shots. You also have things like a heavy flamer and a Reaper autocannon. All of these things are free. There's no choice between them in terms of, should I take this over this? Because there's no value associated with these weapons. Then the result is that, like, there's never really a choice about taking them. You're just going to say, well, what's the best and most obvious option here? And I'm just going to always take that. But yeah, let's see what people in chat think. Most people like free war gear. Interesting. I can't say that I do. Power fists and plasma pistols and deck company. Exactly, yeah. Like, what's the point of having chainswords or anything other than like the best possible weapon? Meltagun does jack to hordes. There is that element, and obviously specialized squads, they don't really have this issue, but I think the problem comes up where when you look at Jackals, for example, Jackals is a good one, right? You're obviously always going to take the Dishonored now because he's no extra points. The extra weapons aren't any extra points or anything like that. So it's sort of stuff like that, like even plasma pistols and berserker squads. Of course you're going to put them on. Why wouldn't you? You know. And yeah, I just can't say that I'm a huge fan of it. Even sponsons on Predator tanks and all these things. But so while I'm not really a big fan of that, the actual key issue here is how this affects the balance of the game, because the way that I was saying it in chat today, and it's an interesting one to bring up. Warhammer 40,000 is a game that's incredibly difficult to balance because of the complexity of the game. And as such, it kind of needs a variety of different dials or sort of abilities to tweak in order to balance it to the best of our ability, for want of a better word. One of those dials in the past was points associated with war gear. So certain items of war gear would cost a certain amount of points based on how their value was perceived, sometimes within that squad or within that army specifically. And that was a really good way of actually balancing the, I suppose, the internal and even external scope of the game. Because if a weapon was overperforming, you could tune that weapon specifically by increasing its points. Or if a weapon is underperforming, likewise you can reduce the points on it, rather than necessarily tinkering with the actual squad. Or maybe the weapon itself was a problem across the board, in the case of meltaguns on Space Marines and Arcs of Omen. And increasing the points of squads there isn't actually going to make things more balanced, because the problem was the meltagun. So when you consider things like that, free war gear means that you don't have this option to rebalance via the whole kind of war gear balancing ability. So it's a little bit worrisome for me, because if they actually come around to addressing points, the only metric that they have is how much a specific unit is overperforming, which in a competitive sense is fine, because you're probably always taking that most powerful build anyway. So that doesn't really matter for competitive, I don't think, too much. my issue with this, and this is kind of what I was saying, we might touch on things that aren't really necessarily the cutting edge of tournament play, but let me just like be realistic with everyone here for a moment. When you're playing your game with your buddy in your house, in your local game store, wherever you might be playing at your club, you're almost certainly playing match play. Even if you're not a competitive player, you're probably playing match play. You're probably playing with points, and you're actually probably using the FAQs. I know everyone says, hey, you don't have to use those. We can use legends, blah, blah, blah. It's all perfectly legal to do that. That's entirely correct. No one does it. Let's be completely realistic here. No one actually does that. The vast majority of 9th edition games were played using the GT mission pack and played using GT FAQs and points, even though those were only supposed to be for tournaments, right? So, pitching that scene. We have our friend Bob here, who loves to run his strange and esoteric tactical marine squad, for some example, and they all have a rather unusual selection of weapons that wouldn't be seen in a competitive scene. But all the tournament players here, they're bringing, we'll say, this specific loadout of tactical marines that's very, very good and very efficient, which is different from the one that Bob uses. Now, when the balance patch comes around and the tactical marines are increasing points, Bob is kind of left wondering, hey, why? My tactical marines weren't doing anything problematic. They didn't have any guns that were causing a nuisance to any of my friends. And now, because we play with those rules, I've got to pay more for them. That doesn't seem very fair. So, when you tweak points for units rather than war gear specifically, you come into a lot of problems like this. It's kind of like a trickle-down effect, where people who don't necessarily use those loadouts or don't necessarily play the best version of a unit have this issue. But let's see what people in chat are kind of saying about this. It's going to be crazy for certain armies with free war gear. Yep. Sisters of Battle is a really good example there in. Feel like you're being forced into taking a certain loadout. Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. A lot of people saying a lot of things here. It generally tends to be the armies that, as Dan says, Imperial Guard getting a lot of what is effectively free war gear, and that's kind of how we're perceiving it currently, because we're still kind of in this 9th edition mindset, and it is essentially free war gear for a lot of cases. Like, so some armies benefit from this way more than others. For example, Primaris Marines don't really benefit from it because they generally have set war gear, so their units are costed around the fact that they only have one loadout. However, you look at something like a Tactical Marine Squad or Death Company, as is pointed out here in chat, and all these other things, you know, it's like it's not a fair metric across the board because some units are disproportionately affected by free war gear compared to others. Also benefits people who have all the options for their units or start buying models now. Yeah, that's true. It's an odd choice to make weapon profiles separate from the actual model to make them easier to balance individually and then making all weapons free. That's very, very true. Very true indeed. Ruri, hello, good to see you. Good to see you, Ruri 100. Everyone takes what's most effective for free and that's it. Yeah, that's pretty much how it's going to be. Yeah, can't say I'm a huge fan. It's hard to say though, because I think even myself trying to come at this from like a level mind and trying to approach this with as little bias as possible, I still have the inherent bias of having just played 9th edition where war gear did cost things, and sort of, I suppose, being burned by the fact that Marines with free war gear was very detrimental to the state of the game towards the end of the edition. So I think a lot of people have that innate bias of like, oh, you're getting this much war gear for free, blah blah blah, and I suppose we don't necessarily know if that's been costed into the units themselves yet. I think looking at some point values, it hasn't really been costed into the units, and my honest perspective on points overall is that they're not very good in terms of. Sorry, I'm trying to be as positive as I can about this, but they're not very well estimated for some units in terms of an external balance kind of sense. I think internally within the World Leaders Codex, apart from a couple of strange outliers, most of the points are actually what I would say is on par or kind of like fair for what you're getting. The Helldrake being over 200 points is certainly something that is in the game for one reason or another, and I fundamentally disagree with Demon Princes being costed above 200 points when they have neither Lone Operative nor the leader keyword. But hey, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we move on, let's just kind of round out, make sure that we're not missing anything here in chat. If you've got any questions about what I've just been saying there, or comments or anything like that, now is the time before we actually move on to looking at the World Eater points. And if you're just joining us, hey, what's up? Great to see you. You can support us by subscribing to the channel, by hitting any of the links down below, or dropping a super chat in the live chat. Let's see what's going on. One thing that is a good choice from Iron Dan was that enhancements are now points. It's a great way to balance relics. Absolutely, Dan. 100%. That is completely and entirely accurate. It's a great way of balancing relics. So why would they just take it away from war gear? You know? Yep, Helldrake's a pure meme. Dead right, Jamie. 100%. Scourges with free war gear. I actually hadn't even thought of that, Rin. That'll be really good for Haywire, for sure, for sure. Because I was like looking at the Scourge data sheet before points came out thinking, yeah, like one version of these is very good and one version is very bad. So, some Chaos Space Marine points are weird. Interesting. I haven't actually looked at anything other than World Eaters yet. And outside of a few examples that I've seen floating around. You think Angron is overcosted, Tanner Miller? Interesting. We're going to be talking about that one soon. So why don't we dive into the points? If you're just joining us, you're watching The Red Path, by the way. I'm Dara. I'm hanging out. Jamie's in chat as well as Warboss and a bunch of other people. Feel free to drop your thoughts and stuff as we're going along. I'll try and get to what I can as we go through it. What we're going to be doing next is we're going to go on to the points for the World Leaders. We're going to analyze it unit by unit, talk about composition overall, and then in the last part of the show, what we're going to do is look at a whole bunch of lists that have been sent to me by various people from our Discord for me to analyze and criticize and, I suppose, comment on. But anyway, let us begin. So what we're going to do is move on to the points. Those are the lists, so we're going to ignore those for now. And what we'll do is we will look at points. Okay, so we have the points here on the screen, and we're going to go through everything, starting with our favorite, the Lord and Savior, Angron. Angron comes in at a mighty 415 points. I believe I am correct in saying that he is the most expensive of the Demon and Loyalist Primarchs. That's pretty rough, I think. That is a little bit rough for Angron. He's quite an expensive model. He's gone up about 55 points from what we had him at in 9th edition. He has gained a lot of abilities, however. He has kind of improved in terms of being a buffing character. He has gained Deep Strike, which is a very, very important change for him in terms of rapid ingress. He's gained the ability to hide behind buildings, amongst other things, and in a meta where damage has been reduced for melee, at least, he's actually still looking pretty good in terms of his damage output. I think I have the data sheet for Angron here, so let's take a look at it now in terms of thinking about the fact that he's 415 points, and is he worth it? Because I know a lot of people are divided about Angron. Some people think he's an auto-include. Some people think he is trash. So, you know, considering 415 points, you've got this very, very fast-moving Demon Primarch. Because realistically, he's moving anywhere between 14 inches at a minimum to 22 inches at a maximum. So he can be extremely good at getting across the board and still charging. His auras are very, very powerful. You know, you've got a potential for extra +1s to your charge rolls, which is a really, really good thing, especially considering that we have lost an awful lot of our charge buffs, which is kind of rough, I think. And then obviously he does have the ability to resurrect. Now that resurrect mechanic, it's a hotly kind of discussed topic because it is semi-unreliable unless you're really building towards making it reliable, in which case it can actually become about a 50-50 sort of mechanic at the best possible variant, I believe, when you're looking at like running multiple Lords of Skulls and all this sort of carry on. So the resurrection mechanic for me isn't something that you can consider with his points cost, because it's something that's going to come up, I think, a lot less than people actually think, because it not only relies on that 666 happening, but it relies on the 666 occurring at the right time in the game as well, which is a little bit rough. Especially considering that, like, you might want to resurrect him in the same turn that you want to pull off an advance and charge. So that's not great. So is Angron worth 415 points? What do we think in chat? That's what I really want to know. Because I personally think he is. I think he's very good for 415 points in the 10th edition ecosystem, for want of a better word, especially because I think alongside other units, you can really build a disgusting kind of gangbusters list where you've got Angron and all the other big bad dudes kind of running up the board, and it's sort of a threat overload. And I think he actually slots into a lot of lists very, very well, whereas before you were kind of building a list around him. Now I think Angron actually inserts into a list quite well, rather than having to be built around, unless you want to build around the resurrection mechanic, of course. Iron Dan, Ron being 415 and the line being 380 is kind of crazy. Yep, 100%. I very much agree. Angron's a no for you, Warboss. That's rough. I can kind of see why people would say no about him as well. It appears that he is expensive. Rain, you're not interested? Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So, my personal opinion is he's probably worth it, provided you kind of build a list that's structured to, I suppose, take advantage of him rather than support him. That's kind of my view on it. Anyway, that's Angron. Ferrari, Angron Survive is absolutely backbreaking. Yeah, like if it comes up, it's so, so good. So that's Angron. Let's look at the 8 bound now. The 8 bound are quite expensive. So, here is where we see the first of the either minimum squad or maximum squad things coming in here with the 8 bound. So you can take them in units of 3 or units of 6. Which is disgusting for me because I loved running units of 4 8 bound. But hey, what can we do? So it's 155 for 3. And it's 310 for 6. Meaning the 8 bound is coming in somewhere between 52 and 53 points per model. Which is a very, very expensive point value for what is effectively a Space Marine that is a little bit tougher to kill than normal and has a bit of a scout move. Now, I have theories about why the 8 bound are pointed this way. I actually think that GW are like actively trying to make sure that people do not do the 8 bound pre-game rush that they've been doing before. And I think that's why 8 bound are looking so high here, because they might make you be like, oh, well, hang on, actually. Do I necessarily want to throw away this unit that costs this much points with its scout move into a screen? I have a weird feeling that there might be a little bit of that going on, where they are like ostentatiously overvalued for what they actually do. Their damage output is a little bit less than what it used to be, and their survivability has arguably increased minorly. And I say minorly now, we're looking at T6 on them instead of T5, and a possible feel no pain with some blood dice going on. But that's still not great, because I don't really think you're getting the value that you want out of the 8 bound, because I mean, if we just look at them here now, let me see if I can pull up the old 8 bound. Yeah, okay, so let's look at these guys now for something that's between 52 and 53 points. What you're getting in terms of output is something that's relatively okay at killing Marines. And that's kind of it, you know? You put 3 of these guys into a Marine unit, you might kill 4 Marines. Probably not a whole squad, I would say. And they have a nice little aura as well, but that kind of revolves around this unit being in the right place at the right time, and also surviving. Overall, though, I'm just not really seeing it with these guys. I don't know if there's something that I'm missing. I still think the Heavy Chainglaive is a nice weapon to have on them, but in general, I think they're a little bit confused. They don't really know what they're fighting into, I think, a lot of the time. They're sort of meant to, by the looks of it, take out heavy infantry, but a lot of heavy infantry is 3 wounds or more. These guys are coming in at damage 2, unless you've got the lacerators on the big guy. So I think it just feels a bit confused. And obviously they've been costed with things like the scout move in mind, and the ability for them to move very, very fast across the board, which is something that is worth considering. But is it worth more than 50 points a model when they die to not that much in terms of like force applied against them? I must say, I think the points for the 8 bound are incredibly expensive. What do you guys think in chat? Let's see. Boom. Sam Dickinson, if they want to stop the rush, why not stop scout move? I totally agree. In our other live stream this week, I went through how much I actually disagree with the 8 bound having the scout move. I think it's just really bad. What else do you run? Well, that's a good question, Harrison. I actually think that the Exalted 8-bound, while they are more expensive, at least know what they're doing. And I guess we can talk about them next. So let's go back to them. So we have the Exalted 8-bound here. Again, 3 or 6 models. Kind of cool that they've gone up to 6 models, which is one of the reasons why I think they're actually, what's the word, like a more takeable option, because you can kind of build them to be a real sort of pressure unit, a unit that is incredibly dangerous, especially when it's being led by either Invocatus or a Juggernaut Lord. So at 60 points a model, they're pricey dudes. But let's look at their profile here again. So the Exalted 8-bound are very much our infantry-based anti-tank threat, or anti-heavy infantry, like quite heavy infantry, custodes and the like, because they're coming in with their 8-bound chain fists, like wounding most vehicles in the game on 3s, and for 1 CP you can wound on 2s, still hitting at AP 3 with quite a lot of attacks. Like a squad of 6 is going to be putting out 4 attacks per guy. They will get the work done against the vehicle or against like custodes or anything like that. So personally, I actually really like these guys. They have Deep Strike, they have Inbuilt Feel No Pain, which can be buffed to a 5-up Feel No Pain, and they have an ability, a very, very rare ability in the game, to trap things in close combat. And I think that ability alone is enough for me to want to take these guys. Because the way I see it, while they are very expensive, you can control their introduction to the game. With things like Rapid Ingress, you can bring them in your opponent's turn within a ruin, somewhere in the midboard, or positioning around it. Then because of their speed, they can move at a minimum 11 in the next turn and still charge. That could top out at something like, what would it be, a 17 or thereabouts in terms of their maximum movement, still charging. And if they get into the thick of it at the go turn, when everything's happening, this overwhelming Wrath aura, which prevents people from falling back within 6 inches around them, can trap not just the unit that they're in combat within, but all the other units that are in combat around them. Meaning that if you play the Exalted 8-bound right, I think they can absolutely win you the game. This ability, the Deep Strike, and the Feel No Pain mechanic are really, really strong powers. Then you consider the possibility of introducing either Invocatus or a Juggernaut Lord. Now, I think Invocatus is the play here for them. Not only can he give you the option of Scout, which is really good for the Exalted 8-bound, obviously, as we know, but he can actually also sort of, while you've prevented the opponent from falling back in their turn, Invocatus can pull those Exalted 8-bound out of combat in your next turn and charge a more meaty target, while you leave this weakened target to kind of pick up the slack, basically. So I really like these guys. Tanner, thank you so much for the $5. Really appreciate that. Do you know if Angron can be your character in the detachment, or if you'd have to take another HQ? You can take Angron as your leader, which is actually quite a nice buff compared to, like where he used to be at 9th, where Angron couldn't be like your main commander. Now he can, which is awesome. So big fan of that. Rory, you're heading off. See you later. Hope you enjoyed the stream so far. The leadership test for the no fallback makes you unsure about them. Yeah, it is a 50-50. This is why I think you want to maximize their present, Dan, because once you introduce them, you want to make sure that there's loads of guys around them. Everyone is -1 damage. It's an easy counter to unit like this. Everyone does have, well, not everyone, I suppose, is -1 damage. It's there a lot. However, it's expensive in a lot of cases. And I think that people are very much overestimating how much stratagems you're going to be able to use in a given turn, which I think is going to kind of become apparent as you actually start playing games. I think right now, I'm seeing an awful lot of things of people saying like, oh, well, Eldar are going to be very, very strong because they simply take all these units and make sure that all their fate dice are 6s and then just do it across the whole board. But there's a lot of things that don't really work about that, because Eldar can't make sure that all their dice are 6s, and it's just not that simple to line everything up. So I think a lot of people are seeing the possibilities of things that can happen, like all these -1 damage stratagems, but not necessarily understanding that what is actually going to happen. Because you have to remember, if you're doing -1 stratagem, you're probably not heroically intervening, you're probably not overwatching, you're probably not interrupting combat, or anything else within your own detachment that you might want to do. For example, for us, it might be like, well, that means that we can't do +1 to wound, or we can't auto-advance 6, or anything that we would like to be able to do. So I think that -1 damage, while you do see it scattered here and there, it's mostly in stratagem format, which means I don't know if it's actually going to come up that much. Before I move on from the Exalted 8-band, anyone else in chat want to kind of hear a little bit about them or get any thoughts in? Can a Juggerlord use a Deep Strike when he joins the Exalted 8-band? No, he cannot, unfortunately. That would be great if he could. It is sad, Sam, that we don't have any CP generation. Absolutely. I think the only free strat that we can get is a Heroic Intervention. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But hey, what can you do? Anyway, I really like the Exalted 8-band. I can see it's a bit of a hot topic in chat that not everyone agrees. And that's totally cool. I might be talking out my ass. I don't know. But I'm feeling good about these guys. And I'm feeling good about their power. And I still don't know if the 8-band are necessarily the worst thing in the world, because their aura is nice for the Lieutenant reroll wounds. But I just think they're costed wrong and they're confused. Whereas the Exalted 8-band, they're expensive, but there's a lot of agency in when you bring them into the game. And when they come in, they'll do the business. So, let us move on. We have the Jackals up next. Now, Jackals are interesting. Let's talk about them. So, Jackals haven't changed in points. They are 75 points for 10 or 150 points for 20. Now that 20 squad is always going to have a double Dishonored and probably, because it's free, the big chainsword, the one that its name escapes me. Let me pull up the Jackals here before we move on, because there's a little bit to talk about with these guys. Now, I have some lists in the list review heavily involving Jackals, and I'm sure you guys can begin to guess what that might be. However, these little fellas, well, their output has been diminished somewhat, been reduced quite heavily, in fact. They have a nice little Feel No Pain now, which is fun because you can make it a 5 for free, well, for free every turn, and they're going to be a little bit of a pain in the ass. One thing that I'm playing around with, I'm not necessarily ready to unleash the full potential of this or realize it until I playtest it, is I'm actually a huge fan. So a lot of people are saying, oh, 8-band are bad because people are going to be able to screen you very easily, blah, blah, blah. Don't scout with them, etc., etc. The idea of Jackals now, because this is something I wanted to do in 9th edition, and I wasn't able to, because Jackals didn't have core. You take Invocatus, and you take 40 Jackals, and you pre-game move them, and then you move them going 8 because of the blood dice, and maybe you get the advance and charge dice, which is probably what you want to fish for. So the thing that you want to set up is a whole bunch of dudes on some objectives in the first turn, so you can re-roll your blood dice, make sure you get the advance and charge. Pre-game move these Jackals, so they're going, 14 to 20 in terms of movement, and then charge in. They'll be able to deal with a screen quite well, I think. It's fair to say. They have enough attacks to get through a screen. Not only that, you have a wall of man flesh in front of the enemy now that they have to get through before they can move out. And it's quite a lot of bodies, and you can make those bodies have a 5-up Feel No Pain, which is pretty annoying for your opponent. And then, if they're a combat army, for example, maybe you've got the blood dice to make them fight on death on 4+ as well, which is just such a pain in the butt. So I kind of like that idea for the Jackals, and I think at 75 points for 10, these guys are actually a pretty good value. I think there's a lot of weird play with the Jackals still, and I personally am still quite interested in running them. The Skull Smasher is still obviously a decent weapon, and the, what was that thing called? The Mauler Chainblade. Yeah, that's the big boy. It's fine, it's fine. You might kill a Marine every now and then with it. It's very hard to say, but the Objective Ravaged ability, the ability to kind of sticky an objective and move on, is particularly pertinent for our army, which kind of relies heavily on its ability to push forward, to continuously apply pressure to your opponent at all times of the game. So I kind of like them for that. But overall, yeah, Jackal's looking okay, I would say, in terms of points. Let's see what chat thinks. Chat is still talking about Exalted 8-band. Jamie's talking about rapid aggressing them. That's my idea, bro. That's my idea. Sam Dickinson, Jackals are great, especially with the Demon Prince. Yes, coming off in the second half, we've got a list with that going on. Nathan, you wanted to say you love the Red Path. Thanks so much, homie. I really appreciate that. Any supports, be it words or whatever, I honestly really appreciate. Jackals is the new goth pressure. Potentially, yeah. I'm here for the Jackal revolution. to be honest. I'm excited for them. Anyway, let's not get too bogged down. So we've got the Khorne Berserkers. We've kind of talked about these guys in depth, like a lot. And it's 115 for 5, so same points as before, or 230 for 10. Again, same points that they used to be, except it's not, because Eviscerators are now free, and so are Icons. And those were like soft taxes on our unit that, at least when I was always building lists in ninth, they were sort of like this annoying thing where I was like, well, I always want these things, but I can never get them. So this is one of those situations in which the free war gear, which I do still disagree with, is beneficial to us because we can get those plasma pistols, we can get the Icons, and we can get the Eviscerators. I do think that 5 Berserkers in general won't get the work done against most marine-based targets. It'll go through elves of all variety, no problem. But if you want to kill a unit that will get the business done, you really need the 10-man. At which point, you're kind of having to factor in an attached character a lot of the time as well. And that's what I've seen in a lot of the lists that were sent to me today. So while I like the Berserker profile a lot, I think this is one unit that really is hurt by not being able to take units of 8 or 6 or anything other than 5 and 10, basically. So I'm not a crazy big fan of that. I think their price is okay, but the unit composition is the hard part. Turdstain Jimmy, thank you so much for the $5. If Angron can be the leader, I might just make a meme list with him, Berserkers, and tanks. Yes, you absolutely should. I think some of the lists that I'm reviewing tonight are pretty much just that. I really appreciate the support as well, homie. Thank you so much. It means a lot to us. Yeah, Angron and tanks is just a hilarious idea. Now, this is not one of the lists that I'm reviewing tonight, but it is a list that you can do. Angron and 3 Lord of Skulls. Just keep that in your mind and think about it. Just think about it, you know? It's probably pretty good. Anyway. Oh, well, look at that. The Khorne Lord of Skulls is up next, and it's the big 420 points. We love to see it. Right. Is the Khorne Lord of Skulls worth 420 points? What do you guys think? Let me know in chat, and let's talk about that guy. So, the big dude. The big dude. Now, everyone knows, or longtime fans of the channel know, I hate the Lord of Skulls so much. I hate him passionately, in fact. Like, there's like a core within me, this hard ball of hatred that is reserved specifically for the Khorne Lord of Skulls. This idiotic flatbed truck with a man coming out the top of it. It's all wrong, and the model is just disgusting. It's despicable, and nothing about it is good. The best part about the Lord of Skulls was when they took off the bottom and gave him Khitan legs, but we can't do that anymore, so that's unfortunate. But all that said, all that hatred said, the Lord of Skulls is looking freaking juicy for 420 points. The Blessed Slaughter ability for manipulating the blood dice is incredibly powerful. A choice of a +1 or -1 to the roll, depending on how many units you kill, is actually such a powerful mechanic for getting the roll that you want when you combine it with things like the banner rerolls and all the other stuff like that. It's just so good. Like that rule alone is actually enough to warrant taking the Lord of Skulls. You know, like seeing that ability is, you could attach that ability on any unit in our codex and I would immediately consider it as being a worthwhile choice, just because it's so fundamentally strong at altering how our entire army functions, right? Because you could have a turn where you're like, I absolutely desperately need this one specific buff to make sure that the turn goes the way I need it to go. And the Khorne Lord of Skulls has an ability to manipulate the dice roll in a way which no other unit in our army can manipulate. It's actually just such a powerful mechanic. But anyway, aside from that, he is very difficult to kill at a high number of wounds, more wounds than a knight, toughness 13, and a 5+ invulnerable save. His output, his damage output, is phenomenally good. His shooting is just so good into everyone. And as I was kind of saying on the stream earlier this week, if his war gear is free, as we were sort of talking about, some of these guns are really good. Like, I'm just going to highlight here very, very quickly the Demon Gore Cannon, which is D6 shots at 14 -4, D6 +2. That thing shoots as hard as Angron slaps, which is just so good. Not to mention the fact that in combat, this guy slaps at a flat 8 damage. Flat 8, which is better than pretty much every other knight with a gauntlet or whatever in the game. So the Lord of Skulls is priced to move at these points, and I predict we're going to see a lot of them. Let's see what Chad has been saying. Artillery General Angron. Yes, Jamie. Yes. Bum, 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 bum. How dare I slander the murder train? Well, I have some fun ideas for actually converting out my own Khorne Lord of Skulls, but we'll get to that in a hobby video maybe. You miss some tank shocking people. I mean, the Lord of Skulls can tank shock people. The Gatling Cannon, very good as well. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. He kills a knight by toughing them. Yeah, 100%. I think he's brilliant, and I can see lists using multiple Lords of Skulls coming up in unironic ways. Anyway, moving on. Khorne the Betrayer, 95 points. Absolutely a phenomenally good price point for this guy now. He offers both lieutenant rolls and captain rerolls in terms of rerolls of 1. His damage output is actually quite good. He has fight and death if he hasn't fought himself. And yeah, he's just great. The Betrayer rule isn't really that bad anymore. It's very rarely actually going to come up and requires a leadership check even when it does. So most of the time, this guy is a phenomenally useful insert into a Berserker squad. And I would say if you're building a list and you've got 2 Masters of Executions, which I think will be not uncommon, and you've got 15 points floating in the list, I think the first thing that you want to do is put in Khorne because he is priced to move at that number. Now, Lord Invocatus at 155 is a little bit expensive, I think. Obviously, giving Scout to 2 infantry units, as I said, the Jackals is the one in my mind anyway, which I really like, is a really, really good ability, and it kind of proliferates the ability to do that Alpha Rush that we've all been kind of discussing, and have seen across 9th edition towards the end at least anyway. So I think he's still pretty good at 155. Is he necessarily going to be as good as what he was? I don't believe so. I don't think his damage output is particularly potent. So I think a lot of people will look at Lord Invocatus now and say, do I really need this guy? The fallback and still charge ability is really kind of interesting for the Exalted 8-bound and possibly for Berserkers as well. But I just think there's not enough going on with him that makes him worth the 155 points. That's my take on him anyway. Moving on from there, we have the World Eater's Chaos Spawn. These guys are fun. So you have to bring 2 of them now. And they weirdly have a 5+ invulnerable save, or Feel No Pain, which you can make into a 4 with the blood dice. So these guys seem like really good for just sticking on an objective and existing and being kind of hard to dislodge with indirect fire, which I think is something we're going to see a lot of. So I can see these guys being your kind of token backfield objective holders, 100%. I can also kind of weirdly see them being used in an aggressive rush sort of ability, because I think their damage output is actually pretty good at killing Marines, but we won't talk too much about them. The next one, I'm going to talk about both of these together. It's the 2 Demon Princes. So they're priced at what I personally think is extremely expensive. So 220 points for the Foot Demon Prince, who gives off the 4+ invulnerable save, and 215 for the Winged one, who can kill himself at the end of the game if he doesn't get his target. Now, these guys, I think, are very, very expensive because they have no protection. So they're kind of just hoping that they don't get picked on. And an inability really to move through walls, especially in the case of the Foot Demon Prince, means that he's almost tunneled into starting on the board and walking around, which kind of leads into the situation where he probably will get shot quite fast. Now, is it worth it for the 4+ invulnerable save he confers? It's a good debate, I think, because there's a point there where you also have to wonder, well, why am I running all these guys up the board without transports? And that's a whole other debate to have, is like, what is the value of a transport in a World Eaters list when we can move as fast as we can? Do we need transports? And if we don't need transports, does the value of the Demon Prince then increase? You know, it's a really strange situation. And I think the Demon Prince almost has to be costed in at being 245, because you're always going to have to take the Helm of Brazen Ire, which has damage on him. So it's a strange one, I think. His damage output is also quite poor for what he is. He's not really going to be killing a lot of things. So he's really there to make sure that this 4+ invulnerable save is going off for, say, your Berserkers or your Jackals or whatever else you're moving up the board. Well, actually, that's kind of it, because the 8-bound already have their invulnerable saves. So Overall, I can't say that I'm too pleased about that price point. Let's see what chat is saying though. The Foot Demon Prince going down is worth a look. Yeah, I would say if he was priced around maybe 190 points, I would be a lot more interested in him for sure. Winged Demon Prince with Berserker Glaive for the Skull Throne kills Mortarion and Knights easily. Wow, really? Okay, that's interesting. Rhinos are necessary because Overwatch and Flamers exist. Not only that, but the amount of indirect which is capable of slowing you down as well makes me believe that despite our improved speed, we're actually going to still be a bit slow if we try and move across the board on foot. Anyway, we have the Defiler up next, which is 210 points. The Defiler just has so much shit going on with it that I have no idea if it's good or bad. It's probably quite good. Are people going to run them? No. The model is terrible and ugly and large and needs to be redone, and I think that's just going to stop people from running them realistically. So let's not talk too much about the Defiler. We'll move on to the Forge Fiend, which is priced at 150 points. Now, people are very, very excited about the Forge Fiend and its ability to dish out Battle Shock. And I think at 150 points, price to move. Really, really solid unit. A lot of us, as World Leader players, actually value firepower, or a fire base, which can sort of lend support to our combat. And there's very few fire bases in our army that lend support as well as the Forge Fiend does, in the sense that it can line up a combat for you really well by battle shocking the enemy. And also its damage profiles are just very good. There's actually so little about the Forge Fiend to dislike. It's just a very, very solid profile. And for 150 points, I think it is definitely worth considering. The Hellbrute then, on the other hand, is also 150 points. And I think it's actually a pretty interesting price point for the Hellbrute, because it has quite a powerful ability that it can sort of reactivate with its Frenzy rule, which is effectively a lot of the times a double fight in combat, but it can be a second shooting thing as well. So it's quite an interesting one, I think. Is it worth 150 points? Well, you have to look at the duality of the Hellbrute. It brings a ranged weapon and a fist. Or it can bring, I think it can take 2 ranged weapons or 2 fists for Twin Linked. And I think most of the time you will see it with a ranged weapon and a fist. Probably either a multi-melta or a las cannon. And then the main claw or the Scourge is worth looking at as well. But I think the claw is probably what people will take. And it's a nice unit to kind of slot into your army if you're sort of like, well, I need to shore up the fact that I don't have a lot of armor or don't have a lot of things to kind of distract from maybe my transports coming up the board. And the Hellbrute can run up the board. It can like go up with everything else and get into combat and do a reasonable amount of damage. But I think the question here that we have to look at is it worth it over a Forge Fiend, which will dish out an awful lot more ranged damage and potentially aids your combat a little bit better in the sense that it can battle shock guys. Let's see what chat is saying. It can fight or shoot without being damaged. It just has to be targeted. Are you serious? I thought it had to be damaged. That's wild. That's so stupid. But I mean, I also love it. But whatever. Yeah, it's still good. I still like the battle shock though. Yeah, people hype on the Forge Fiend. I see it. Las cannons on rapid fire. Yeah. Winged Demon Prince isn't worth it because Angron exists. You could run both. I was sent a list. I'm not going to review this list, but I want to shout out Tibbles, who sent me a list that had 3 Foot Demon Princes and 3 Winged Demon Princes and Angron in the list. Anyway, keep the chat going, folks. I'm trying to get to as much as I can. As I say, if you want to support the stream, you can super chat us and I'll get to your question as well. But I realise that we are talking almost for 50 minutes already and we're about halfway through the points. So, one unit that I think we can all fairly say we can skip over is the Helldrake, because it's costed at 215 points. And this to me is GW saying, without saying, we don't want you to use the Helldrake. We hate it. You hate it. Keep it on the shelf. Keep it in the box. Don't worry about it. You won't see it in 10th edition. And you know what? Fair enough. I'm glad it's not good because I hated painting them. And yeah, it's just a unit that I have kind of like the Lord of Skulls passionately hated for a long period of time. But I know people do like the Helldrake. So I would say if you're into that whole kind of flying dinosaur engine vibe, it's unfortunate that this guy is looking as bad as he is, because he is looking quite bad, I think. And at 215 points, it's wildly overcosted. Anyway, let's talk about the Land Raider. So, depending on what side of the Chaos Gods you fall on, the Land Raider is worth a different amount of points, depending on the codexes. However, our one comes in at 255 points, which is similar to what it was before, as far as I'm aware anyway. And I think this unit is price smooth. Really strong sort of profile, as we've discussed during the week about the uses of the Land Raider, the strengths that it has relative to where it was in 9th. And as a mechanism for bringing both fire support and transport capacity to the table at the same time, underneath the same hood, the Land Raider is just so good, I think. A lot of the lists that I was sent today had Land Raiders in them, and I can see why. It's a very popular unit. Aesthetically, people love it in general, and right now, the rule set that it has is just incredibly potent, I think. So at 255 points, I think a lot of lists will see one, and I think a fair few lists are going to see more than one as well. And I'm hyped for it. I'm ready for these bad boys to be good, because they've been bad since I've started playing the game competitively. And I'm very excited to see the Land Raider back on the table in force. Personally, I'm toying with the idea of running 2, but I think most of the time it's almost like built into my list already from the get-go is that there's going to be a Land Raider in there. I just think that it offers too much. Like the firepower that comes out of it, unrestricted firepower as well, is just a very powerful kind of selling point for this unit, I think. So what do people think about the Land Raider in chat? Let's see. Land Raiders are back. You betcha. You betcha. Hyder, what's up? Joining late, watching at 1.5 speed to catch up. Hey, don't worry about it. The VODs are going to be available after this. So if you don't catch it live, you can always watch it on demand. That's totally fine. But I appreciate everyone hanging out here live. The chat is great, and I love reading it. Dan, Land Raider is great for the toughness and assault ramp, but las cannons are as bad as they have been previously. 4 shots with no form of rerolls is hard to justify. You're full of lies, Dan. You're full of lies, because the artillery Primarch Angron will give them all the rerolls they need. Land Raiders are a go. Benefit of adding as many skulls as you want. Absolutely, Everett. Good to see you as well. Good to see you. Angron rerolls. Yep, Angron gives hit rerolls, not just combat rerolls, hit rerolls. Let's make sure that we're getting that right before we make a fool of ourselves as we did the last day on stream. Where is old Ronald? Here we go now. While a friendly World Eaters unit is within 6 of this model, that's the charge one. While a friendly World Eaters unit is within 6 of this model, each time a model makes an attack, you can reroll the hit roll. Angron gives Land Raiders full hit rerolls. Got. So, let's move on. World Eaters, Lord and Juggernaut, 120 points. Great price point for this guy. Yeah, really good. So, Lord and Juggernaut gives a few interesting buffs. Reroll advances, reroll charges, and reroll Blood Surge, which I really like. I really like that the Blood Surge is in there, because strong Blood Surge can win games. I've won games on good Blood Surge rolls. So I really like that that's in there, and obviously the ability to reroll advances in turns where you have advance and charge up, and the ability to reroll charges is obviously just really good. I actually really like the Juggernaut for attaching to Berserkers over 8-bound, I think. Though I think if you were to attach someone to a regular 8-bound squad, I would attach this guy instead of attaching Invocatus. And I think with the Berserker Glaive as an enhancement as well, he's pretty decent, I would say. He's pretty decent. All right. What's going on in chat? Not too much right now. That's all good. Just Jamie talking muck. Anyway. World Eater's Master of Executions. This guy is the talk of the town at the minute. Everyone loves the Master of Executions, and I can see why. He is an incredible way of getting fight first on your Berserker units, and I don't really know if there's any more that we need to say other than the fact that he's 80 points, and that kind of feels like to me an 80-point sergeant for any 10-man Berserker squad. Obviously, you know, with things like the Berserker Glaive, he can top out at something silly like 45 damage in one turn, and having precision is just really good too on a unit that can just come in and lop off the heads of some characters. So yeah, I think at 80 points, priced to move. So let's see. Oh, thank you, Turd Stain Jimmy, for the $1.99. What am I thinking about Demon Allies? I haven't looked at them in depth. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I haven't looked at them in depth. However, I like the bloodletter profile for an ally, in the sense that it kind of slots into this unusual position that's kind of weirdly between berserkers and 8-bound, which is very strange. I kind of feel like they're this weird in between the two of them, and I actually like them. I think I was talking to someone and they were saying as a sort of resource of more deep strike as well, they're quite good. But one thing that I do think we will see is bloodthirsters coming in. Bloodthirsters look really good and pair well in Angron lists. And I'm actually a big fan of the Juggernaut Cavalry, the Skull Crushers as well. I think they kind of have some nice rules and potentially have play with the World Eaters, but I would say the thing that has the most play is probably the Skull Cannon. The Skull Cannon, with its ability to induce battle shock on enemy units as well, similar to the Forge Fiend, is very powerful for us for lining up the charges correctly. And obviously it's not a bad profile in terms of damage output. But yeah, inducing battle shock from the Skull Cannon, it's probably the go-to ally, I would say. And it's not going to shock me if we see 2 or 3 Skull Cannons allied in to lists. Let's see if there's anything else in chat. Yeah, sorry, Warboss, I won't talk too much more about Demon Allies, because that's kind of about the extent of my knowledge and review on them so far. Anyway, I think Brigands, Snake Whips for Knight Allies is probably your go-to. Anyway, as I say, I'm going to get back to the points here. If you want to ask more questions in chat, hit us up with a super chat and I'll get to them when I can. So we have the World Eater's Mauler Fiend at 175 points. 25 points more than the Forge Fiend, but with significant damage output. I think you have to sort of look at it as like am I taking the Forge Fiend or the Mauler Fiend? I know they obviously do completely different things, but I do think that if I was looking at a list to have a Mauler Fiend, I think I'd probably go for a Forge Fiend. Because, well, the Mauler Fiend kind of runs up the board and is like, ooh, ooga booga, I'm quite scary. And you sort of have to deal with it, distraction, Carnifex kind of vibe. I think the Hellbrute in that situation is probably just better. And it's a little bit cheaper too. So I think overall, 175 points for the Mauler Fiend is just a little bit too expensive. So we are nearly there for the points, and then we can move on to list reviews. Coming up next, we have the 2 Predators. So at the start of the stream, I talked a little bit about how certain books seem to have not been kind of considered relative to other books in terms of their points. What I mean by this is that there are some units in some armies that are incredibly good at what they do in their given role, and a unit which is in the same role in a different army might not be as good, but somehow be more expensive. And I think the Predator is the epitome of this. A Predator, Annihilator, or Destructor is 130 points, which seems okay, and it probably is actually okay. However, a Fire Prism for the Craftworld Eldar army, which does more damage, has the Fly keyword, can shoot out of line of sight through another Fire Prism, can move after it shoots for a stratagem, and has flat damage, and has reroll, 1 hit roll, and 1 wound roll in a faction which has the same rule as well, effectively meaning it has double hit and wound rerolls, is 125 points versus the World Eater Predator's 130. That's bullshit. That's complete bullshit. And what that shows is that these books were tested in pods or in sort of groups where it's like, we'll test the World Eaters book against the Deck Guard book and against the Chaos Space Marine book and maybe, some other Xenos one or something, and then we'll test Eldar against these armies. And we'll point those armies based off how those games go. But we'll never consider the points for other armies that we didn't test them against. It just shows a lack of understanding of the game, of proofreading from GW. The fact that you can have a battle tank in one army and a battle tank in another army, one which is much superior to the other, but is somehow cheaper. It just speaks volumes of their kind of inability to make sure that they're accurately and correctly proofreading, I think. And I'm very disappointed to see that. And that's my biggest gripe with the game system that we're going to be looking at for 10th. Like, the system itself looks fun. 10th edition looks like it's going to be a good time, but it feels so rushed and wrong, and like we're playing an alpha test of a game. If they had sent us these rules and these points maybe 6 months ago and said, this is a beta, we want you to test these points and see how they feel, I'd be a lot more okay with it. But there's some things here that just don't make sense in the context of other units in other armies. And the Predator, while it looks great here, is just incomparable to things like the Fire Prism, things like the Hammerhead, even things like the Space Marine battle tanks, which inexplicably the Predator for the Space Marines has rapid fire in its main turret and our one doesn't. It's just like it's fundamentally frustrating to have to see these sort of things. And as much as I'm trying to be optimistic about 10th edition, for the sake of producing good and interesting content to watch, and also just for my own mental health, obviously, there's things like this which you just can't ignore. You can't really put a good spin on it. And yeah, it's annoying. It's annoying. Anyway, what's gone on in chat? If I think the Fire Prism is dumb, don't look at Ravagers. Aren't they 95 points for like 3 Dark Lances or something like that? With like a pain token for full rerolls to hit? That seems balanced. That'll be fine. Anyway, the Predator itself is good. I really like the Destructor variant with the autocannon, but I think it falls into the trap of sort of doing the same thing that a lot of our infantry combat is doing in terms of blending enemy infantry. So I'm not actually sure really if it has a role in our army when you have something like the Forge Fiend that for 20 points more will do more damage and induce battle shock, and is kind of a little bit more dangerous in combat too. So I think overall we have to look at it in an internal vacuum here for our own sake. And I think what we have to say and conclude is that the Forge Fiend is probably just the better choice over the Predator. I think, but I'm not sure about that. And I suppose it does come down to points. Anyway, the World Leader's Rhino is 85 points. Always has been, always will. That'll never change. The Rhino's great. And like I say, we do have to have that discussion of like, do we need transports in this edition? I'm not sure. I do think we do though. And I can see Rhinos being a staple as usual. Anyway, the last unit to talk about here is the World Eater's Terminator Squad, which is coming in at 39 points. A model which isn't too bad, I think. I think the Loyalist ones are actually very expensive. I may be incorrect about that, but I believe that they're actually much more expensive than this, which is kind of funny. I like the Terminators. I think it's a little bit weird that they're War Gears free, like everything else, and this is the unit that's probably the most blatant example of where it's kind of a little bit strange, because you've got all sorts of heavy weapons and combi weapons that you can put on them. But hey, they're not bad. Like, I just think that in an army that wants to go very fast all the time, these guys are a little bit slow. Obviously, you can make them fast, but they're still a lot slower than everything else. That said, Terminators in general look to be in a good position in this edition. And I think at 39 points a model, we're one of the cheaper Terminators out there. And I think we'll see a lot of play. So personally, I like them a lot. Anyway, and El, good to see that you're back, homie. Great to see you. That's about the points done. I'm going to hop in chat here for a little bit, make sure that I'm not missing anything too much. Appreciate all the support so far, folks. All the chat. It's been fantastic. Everyone who's watching, thank you so much. We are going to be moving on to list reviews next, which is going to be a little bit of fun. We've got some community lists to go through. But yeah, I'll give chat a couple of minutes if they want any questions before we move on. And I am just going to grab a quick water. Tam the Third, I very much appreciate your comment about the quantum superpositions and the rhinos. Yeah, GW proofreading good. GW proofreading very good. Anyway, we're going to move on to a little bit of a list review. Now, I have a selection of lists. 8 lists, in fact. 8 of the finest lists that were sent to me today. Everyone who sent me a list today, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun reading with them, and I'm sorry if I didn't necessarily get to reply to everyone. I've picked out 8 of my favorite lists, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they do, what I might change if I would change anything about them, and how they function, how viable are they. And I've picked a lot of different lists, and I think it speaks volumes about 2 different things here. So we've looked at all the points, and I would say that for the most part things are pointed fairly in my mind, which means that we have quite a nice sandbox of units to pull from in terms of like, hey, a lot of these things are actually worth the points that you're paying for them, So that means that we can kind of dive in and pull things around and do all these sort of playstyles. So the list that I have here, they're all very varied, and it speaks about those points actually being quite good internally. It also speaks volumes about how good our community is at coming up with weird shit and really fun builds. So if you sent me a list, thank you so much. The creativity from the Red Path community and the World Leaders community at large is just phenomenal. I love it so much. And yeah, it just makes me very, very happy to be part of it and to present it here on stream tonight. So, your death is accompanied by distant sounds of artillery fire. All these lists are named. This list is brought to you by none other than the Primarch himself, Jamie of the Red Path. Let us look at what Jamie is cooking up. Jamie's HQs are Angron, a Master of Executions with the Berserker Glaive, and a regular Master of Executions. He has 2 10-man Jackal squads, he has 2 5-man Berserker squads. I presume the Master of Executions are in each of them. He has then got 5 Terminators, 1 Land Raider, 2 Predator Destructors, and 2 Hellbrutes with Las and Fist. As well as that, he has 1 little Rhino hanging out. So Jamie he's living my dream. He's taken the Land Raider, and he's taken 2 Predators, and he said, we're playing World of Tanks, and also Angron is still here. This list is thin on the ground, I think, to say the least. Thin on the ground in terms of boots. Those Jackals and Berserkers are pretty much all you've got, although I do like the Terminator insert in there. Because you kind of have the option of putting them in the Land Raider or not, and maybe leaving them in Deep Strike for a Rapid Ingress. There's a whole lot that you can do with the Terminators, including jettisoning them out of the Assault Ramp after the Land Raider moves, which I am quite a big fan of, actually. Although I think a lot of the time the Terminators actually benefit a little bit more by starting on the board and just moving the innate movement buffs that our army can get, rather than necessarily using the Assault Ramp. But, you know, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Obviously, Angron is a massive threat, which is a little bit hard to focus on here when you've got a Land Raider and 2 Predators kind of in the mix as well. So I think overall the list presents a lot of threats, and as much as I love Jamie, I do think that it will run into problems into the likes of Craftworld Eldar, which will just be able to pick up a lot of his armor very, very quickly, and then sort of deal with the infantry as and when they need to. And that's my big worry for the list, is that it's too blocky, if that makes sense, that there's too much sort of large-bodied vehicles moving around the place. But, you know, it's a cool list, and I love it. Turn stage Jimmy, yeah, the Berserker squads would probably be in the Rhinos, because as far as I'm aware, I think Jackals can't be transported inside Rhinos. Anyway, that's Jamie's list. We like it. Let's move on. Up next, we have So You've Thrown In with Khorne. This list was actually written by me, and it's not a competitive list. So, as much as the Red Path is all about competitive play, well, not all about it, but it's a big focus of the channel and the network. I like to think that we're quite a welcoming community as well. And I built this list with the intention of helping out people who are just getting started with World Eaters or the game in general. So this list is based off the contents of the Combat Patrol for World Eaters and units which are interesting for new people and, you know, kind of have that World Eaters appeal to them. And sort of just, it all comes together into quite a classic World Eaters feel. And it's just very accessible and easy to learn. There's not any complicated movement mechanics or anything like that here. As I say, so you've thrown in with Khorne. So, it starts off with a Lord on Juggernaut with the Berserker Glaive. It's nice and simple. He can attach to a variety of units in this list as you want. So it's kind of fun. It gives that sort of like replayability value as well for people getting used to the rules and stuff. You can see how this guy will do in different units. And then we have Khorne as well, an iconic unit to use, and will help give your Berserkers that little boost that they need to make sure that they're kind of getting over the line, for want of a better word, in combat. So you've got 2 10-man Berserker squads as just very solid units that are both transported in Rhinos. And then we have 10 Jackals for hanging out at the back, doing, you know, Khorne's work, hanging out, capping points. Going on from there, in the sort of elites section, even though there's no elites anymore, we have 10 Terminators as a solid brick of, you know, very fun unit to paint up, especially if you're just getting into the World Leaders. And you'll put these guys down on the table, maybe from Deep Strike, and your opponent will have a very tough time picking up all of them, especially if you bring them in via Rapid Ingress. So there's sort of a skill element in terms of learning how to use that unit specifically as well. Then we have 2 units of 3 8-bound to sort of introduce the concept of scout and sort of moving around these high value units. And then we have 2 Mauler Fiends just to run up the board alongside your rhinos and act as protection. So the list is incredibly simple to play. Everything does exactly what it says on the tin. And it just kind of works. The composition is fine. It'll control the board relatively well, and it's just very easy to play, which allows you to make a lot of interesting in-game decisions if you're just starting to learn the army. There's no complicated, hey, you've got to jump through all these different loops. You will just actually reap the rewards of you playing this army as you think it should be played. So I think it's a fun one if you're just getting into the World Leaders. And if you are, and you're tuning into the Red Path, I hope this is helpful for you, and I hope for everyone else it's not too annoying having to kind of look at a somewhat more basic list that might not seem that interesting. But I think it's important that we have something for everyone here as well. So with that in mind, let's move on to Oops All Jackals by Master Rage Cage. This is where shit starts to get a little bit weird as we dive into the Discord lists presented by our lovely people from the Red Path. So if you're in chat, feel free to comment on any of these lists as we go through them as well. This list is a Demon Prince with a Brazen Helm for half damage, and a Demon Prince with wings and the Berserker Glaive, which apparently, I didn't know this guy actually has a high damage potential, which is cool. And of course, we have our Lord and Savior, Angron. We also have 120 Jackals. Yep. And then we have 5 Terminators. So it's incredible. You have the Demon Prince, who's like the kind of the person in charge of the creche, and you have all the toddlers in the form of 120 jackals clustered around him with a 4+ invulnerable save and a 5+ feel no pain. I love this list. I think it's hilarious. This isn't probably how I would actually run this list, or how I would construct the 120 jackal list, as it may be called. Oops All Jackals, I think, is a fantastic name for it, so I think we'll stick with that. But the Oops All Jackals builds, I would actually probably double down on the capacity to get Feel No Pains, because I think in every turn you are going to be using that blood dice roll for the Feel No Pain. So I think you need to look at the book and say, well, how much Feel No Pain can I actually jam into this? So I think I would probably run Exalted 8-bound as well to get a 5 up on them. And I'd actually probably also run 6 spawn across 3 units, just to kind of make sure that they're running up too, and sort of intermixed amongst all the jackals and things like that. I don't know if Angron necessarily has a place in this list, and I think in favour of him, I would potentially just run Berserkers up the board, as many Berserkers as you can get, which is probably a little bit under 2 squads, and just run them up with the Demon Prince as well on a 6-up Feel No Pain in their case, and a 4+ invulnerable save, and just see what happens. I think it's very fun. I think it has a lot of board control, and while you do have to kill the Demon Prince, if you don't kill him fast enough, I suppose in this iteration of the list by Master Rage Cage, you have to deal with Angron or a Winged Prince running around as well. So in that sense, now that I look at it, the composition of the HQs actually kind of does work well, as they're sort of like distraction carnifexes for each other. But yeah, it's a hilarious list. I really, really love it. 120 jackals because the throne needs someone's skulls. Damn right, Ferris Oxide. It's exactly how it is. So, moving on. This is actually one of my favourite lists that I reviewed today. I called it The Blood Tide, and it's by Dr. Iron Steel. So, it starts off with Khorne, a Master of Executions, 2 of them in fact, and a Lord on Juggernaut. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 5-man Berserker squads and 2 10-man Jackal squads. We have 2 Predators and 2 Mauler Fiends and 2 Rhinos. I love this list for a lot of reasons. You have a ton of units in this list. Way, way more than any of the other lists that we're going to look at today. And that to me is value. You know, it gives you agency in a game. It gives you options and redundancy. It means that if you lose a unit to a misplay, you probably have a unit to replace it. And in the form of 6 5-man Berserker squads, at some point, some of them will start getting the work done. They'll have some leaders attached in there as well, obviously. And you still have some Jackals for the backfield work. And all of that is fantastic. It's really good. I remember reading through the start of this list thinking, brilliant. Loads of things here that I'm loving. And then I saw that there was 2 Predators and 2 Mauler Fiends, and I just said, wow, like that's an incredible, incredible amount of support for all this MSU. And I was shocked that you could get it all in. Like the firepower coming out of the Predators, and then the Mauler Fiends running up as well, distracting from the Rhinos, which are just filled to the brim with Berserkers. it all just comes together so well. And actually, I think this is a highly competitive list. Like, the pressure that this puts on in the right hands, if you understand how to apply the pressure well, I think this list can do really well at a tournament. You could be looking at a very comfortable 3-2, possibly even a 4-1, depending a little bit on your matchups, but also depending on how you play the list. So I think this will function best as a sort of a staggered wave kind of approach. And the only thing that I think this is lacking is anything that can sort of hit a turn 1 charge reliably. That's the only thing that I would say this list is lacking. If I wanted to work that in, how would I do it? I suppose it's a difficult one. I think you might have to consider the Predators leaving in favour of some 8-bound coming in. You lose a bit of your fire support, but you gain more pressure early in the game. It's something to think about, but even then, I can't really fault this list. I think it just does so many things, and it does them quite well, so I'm a big fan. Let's just make sure I'm not missing anything in chat here. How would 120 Jackals do under a chest clock? Good question, Jason. I would suggest movement trays. Can you put 2x5 Zerkers in a Rhino or one unit only? I think you can put 2x5 in. Anyway, let's move on to the next list. This list is from one of our lovely moderators, Tibbles, and I called it Thick Treads. The list that we just reviewed by, was it Dr. Iron Steel? Yes, had a lot of units. This one does not. It is 2 Masters of Executions. One of them has a Berserker Glaive, and it is 20 Berserkers. Tibbles didn't tell me how they were sort of divided out. I can only assume multiples of 5 or 10. Then there's 2 Land Raiders, and then there's 2 Lords of Skulls, and that's it. This list has a lot of energy, and I'm here for the energy. I kind of expected Tibbles to come out with something like a double Land Raider or a double Lord of Skulls, but he just did both. So Tibbles is sort of playing a game of what if I pretend to be Iron Hands with some combat? And I'm kind of here for it. Is this list good? I really don't know. It's very hard to say. I think if you run into something like Imperial Knights or anything with a considerable amount of anti-tank, you're probably in a lot of trouble. If you run anything with considerable board control, you're also probably in a lot of trouble. Equally, if you run into Horde, I think it's probably not going to go well. However, there are some matchups where you will absolutely wreck face with this list, and people simply will not be able to deal with 4 massive heavy tank units in enough time before some of them start doing significant damage. So yeah, I'm here for it. To be honest, it's just a really fun list, and it's very, very Tibbles. Yeah, some people in chat saying this is a Tibbles list. Yep, 100%. Yeah, the Tower of Khorne project. He is supposedly working on the Tower of Skulls. And I'm here for it. We were talking a lot about different sort of demon engines from the past. Because I want to get... like, the Lord of Skulls, I want to do one, but I don't want to make him like the Lord of Skulls, so I kind of want to create like a sort of a Doom Blaster from back in the day. And I know Tibbles is kind of working on the Lord of Skulls, so turning it into a Tower of Skulls, which is very, very cool. You inspired him back in the day with the Proteus. Yeah, rip the Proteus. I'm actually using a Proteus as my Land Raider at the minute. So yeah, Tibbles' list is incredible. I don't think it's, I would say, a tournament list, but it's definitely a list that if you wanted to have a fantastic game with your buddies, you'd have a lot of fun with this one. Anyway, moving on. I called this one BFG Division, and it's by Astromancy. This list is pretty cool. It's a little bit similar to Tibbles, but I would say this is like if you took Tibbles' list and tried to put a competitive spin on it, this is kind of what you'd come out with. And what we have is Angron, a Master of Executions who, according to Astromancy, would take either Favoured of Khorne or the Berserker Glaive and a regular Master of Executions. You've got 2 10-man Berserker squads and a 10-man Jackal squad. So some decent boots on the ground there. Then you have 2 Maulers and 2 Land Raiders. So where Tibbles has the 2 Lord of Skulls, they've kind of been paired back into Land Raiders or into Mauler Fiends here. And we've introduced Angron. So we've divided up our threats a little bit by sort of diluting them almost. However, you've got 2 Land Raiders, which is still a very solid fire base, and you have 2 of these horrible mutated demon dogs running up the board alongside Angron. And I can only assume that within the Land Raiders there are the 10-man Berserker squads as well. So this puts out a whole lot of armoured pressure, and if you come up against this in a tournament and you don't have a lot of anti-tank or ways to deal with massed armor running up in front of you, this list will really pressure you very, very fast. The problem is if you do have the answers to that, you will be able to pick up some of these assets probably too quickly for them to cross the board reliably. Some stuff is going to make it across the board, but I think not a lot of it will. And I think the weakness of this list is if you lose too much in a given turn. Say you lose a Land Raider and a Mauler Fiend in turn 1 or something like that, you're immediately fighting from quite a significant disadvantage. I think there's a lot of points here tied up in big units, and I think that might be where the weakness is. I know a lot of these units can put out a lot of damage, but you run the risk of introducing a lot of these high threat targets and stuff like that. You make it a little bit easy for your opponent to pick the important targets. You know, in my mind, the first thing I'm doing is trying to take out those Land Raiders, because the Mauler Fiends, they're only going to do so much damage. Those Land Raiders will kick out a lot of firepower, and they're also going to have Berserkers inside them. So if I can take them out, we should be golden. That's my one kind of criticism of the list, but I do think in the right matchup and with the right amount of pressure, this list can function very, very well. What else is going on in chat? That's your list, Everett. Nice. Love it, love it. As I say, it's a fun one. Chat's going good still. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's keep moving. Again, if you want my attention in chat, hit me up with an old super chat or something like that. Or if you just want to support the channel in general, it's all welcome. Out here streaming and stuff like that. Anyway, this one is fun. I call this the school bus run. So the school bus run is by Ketzer from Discord again. So it's a little bit similar to what we just talked about, but it sort of doubles down on some of the concepts while diluting others. So we've taken out Angron. We have just one Master of Executions with a Berserker Glaive. And we have a lot of Berserkers here. We have a 10-man squad and 4 5-mans. So your boots on the ground, your footprint is already pretty good here. It's better anyway than the previous ones that we've looked at. Then you've got 2 Hellbrutes and a Predator and 3 Land Raiders. So I imagine the Land Raiders here are full of Berserkers. It's only logical. And you'll be starting the board with the 3 of them kind of rocking around the place, and 2 Hellbrutes running up alongside them. You've got a Predator in the back for a little bit of fire support. You're hoping he's going to be towing an objective from the home field. And then the middle of the board is going to be this horrible conglomeration of armoured World Eaters messing around. But the great thing about this list that I actually really like is it has the capacity to have these smaller Berserker units kind of jettison out of the Land Raiders at regular intervals and cap objectives, do important things, clean up infantry that maybe the bigger stuff doesn't want to do. And you have these cheeky Hellbrutes, which in this list, no one wants to shoot them. They want to be shooting the Land Raiders. So I would say you're almost guaranteed that the Hellbrutes will make it across the board and get to combat, because everyone's going to be hard focusing on triple Land Raider, which has a good amount of firepower coming out of it. It will rip things. So actually, I really like this list. I would say in terms of like the heavy lists that we've been looking at, this is probably the most competitively viable. I do think, again, you come up against someone who's doubled down on their anti-tank, like we'll say Craftworld's triple prism list, those Land Raiders are going to suffer. But I think because your eggs aren't really all in one basket with these things, you have redundancy built in with the Land Raiders. It actually kind of covers itself almost. So big fan of this list, coming in at 1990 points. Moving on to list number 8, Sensational by Iron Dan. So I left this list for the end because... did you miss your list getting roasted? Yes, you did, Jamie. I said it was bad, pretty much. Bad in a nice way. So I left this list for last. It's from Iron Dan, and I think there's a lot to talk about in this list. This is probably going to be the list that we see coming out initially from competitive World Leader players before the meta shifts. This is the easiest thing to play. This is the closest to the old style 8-band rush. And I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards it immediately because it's familiar. As I said in the stream earlier this week, home comforts, you know. A lot about this is going to be familiar, but it's got some interesting changes, which I think Iron Dan has hit on like quite well here. And it's probably what we're going to see. So let's go through it. We've got Angron. We've got a Lord and Juggernaut with the Berserker Glaive, and we've got Invocatus. Just focusing in on the HQ choices here. The capacity to do the 8-bound rush now in a list that Angron is also in, because 8-bound have their scout built in, and Angron obviously doesn't, there's no like warlord trait that Invocatus has to have, so Angron doesn't interrupt that. Meaning, Angron can actually partake in the rush because he's very fast himself. It actually adds this whole other level of threat to the 8-bound rush that wasn't there before, because you have the Primarch running up with you now, this guy who just spits out damage. So while before the 8-bound rush would hit you and you kind of be left reeling, you'd be like, oh, I have to deal with this. It can hit you now with a Demon Primarch in your lines as well. So that's significant. You also have 10 Jackals and 2 10-man Berserker squads, which in this list can get the scout move. I don't know if they will. And then moving on from that, you have 3 3-man 8-bound units, 2 3-man Exalted 8-bound units, and 2 Spawn, capping out at 1960 points. You're probably giving the scout move to the Exalted 8-bound. So what you're going to have going on here is Invocatus and 3 regular 8-bound squads and 3 Exalted 8-bound squads flying across the board in the first turn. What's the maximum movement that they can get? So you can go 6, then they move 9, plus 2 is going to be 11, so we're up to 17, and they can top out at a 6-inch advance going 23 and still charging. That's pretty good. You can cross into your opponent's deployment zone with more than half your army. In fact, I would say probably close to 3/4 of your army in the first turn of the game. That's pretty devastating. Yeah, I can see this being extremely popular in the initial sort of World Leaders meta. And I think it's just gained an awful lot of strength by having Angron in the list. Having this extra resource that the 8-bound rush never even had to consider before. And I think he actually gels really well with the list. It kind of, in my mind, it's like Baywatch. You've got all these like half-naked dudes sort of doing that Baywatch run across the board, and then as they kind of get closer, you realize that they're actually these nail-ridden maniacs that are going to tear you apart. So aesthetically, it's quite an amusing one. I don't like this list in terms of how it plays. It's nothing against Arandan or anyone who runs it, but I think this list it's too simple. It doesn't offer a skill ceiling to access. It's sort of just like you rush everything forward, or you do some weird positioning around the board, and it all just kind of happens. Or else it just doesn't happen, and you get shot to pieces. Because my big problem with this now, with the 8-bound rush in general, is that it can get ripped apart. And when it does, the point value that you lose is significant. 8-bound and Exalted 8-bound are extremely high-costed units now. So if you misplay these units, if you play them wrong, if you leave them exposed and they get picked up without doing the damage that they need to do, because they need to do that damage now. So if that happens and they get picked up, you've lost the game. So in that sense, there is a little bit more skill to the 8-man rush than there was before, because you have to micromanage your resources better to make sure that you're getting the value out of them that you need to get in order to win the game. You have less resource on the board in terms of your overall footprint and where you can go to get points in terms of objectives and stuff. So that is an interesting part about how the 8-bound rush has changed, but I still think fundamentally the ability to just cross the board in the first turn with almost your entire army it's just too much. It's just too much. I disagree with Scout going on the 8-bound, and I disagree with this amount of points being able to make a first turn charge. It's just not that healthy for the game, and what it does is it results in a lot of these units being pointed around the capacity that they have to do that, which isn't always necessarily a good thing. That's my view on that, and that is list number 8. Curious to see what kind of has been going on in chat as I was saying that. Dan, you agree? Good. I'm glad. Boom. Yeah, I see what you're saying, some idiot, as well. With you kind of have to. It's very, very hard to balance the amount of 8-bound. Ronan, I like it. Dan put all their eggs in one basket and put the basket in the cannon. Benjamin, I think you're hitting on an important point there, and Exalted 8-bound, for a lot of reasons, including the feel no pain, do make themselves a lot more valuable than the regular 8-bound. I just actually think they kind of slot into that role a lot better. But yeah, in any case, those are the lists and those are the points. It's been relatively fun chatting about everything here with you all, folks. We're not going to necessarily close it out just yet. What we'll do now is we'll turn over to a little bit of a stream Q&A. So if you've got any kind of like main questions about whatever we talked about this evening, anything that you want to know my thoughts on, now is the time. So get asking questions in chat. I'll answer as many as I can. I'll prioritize super chat questions. There's not too many people at the minute, so I should be able to get to most of them. But we'll send maybe 10 or 15 minutes or however long the questions are flowing talking about things. So if you want to know about my opinions about any of the points or anything like that, now is the time. But overall, I think how it's looking is that internally, I like the points. I like the points a lot internally, actually, because it opens up a lot of there's a conversation to be had about all these different builds that you can do. Like the list that we even looked at there, there's like infantry hordes, there's MSU spam. I really love that MSU spam list. I can't talk about it enough. It speaks to my heart and my own personal playstyle. There's the 8-band rush still. It lives on. It lives forever. And there's Mecha Land and stuff like that. As I said, you can run 3 Khorne Lord of Skulls and Angron in a list with points to spare. Just think about that. Think about that for a while. Boom. Okay, how's Cranon, some idiot? Oh, yes. Okay. Cranon's going great. Yeah, I'll have him done for you any day now. As soon as I am off the content production train for Jamie and Jack. Rin, is the Vizark better than the Mo? I think so, because the Vizark has, I think, a higher damage output and also can attach to a better variety of squads, as far as I remember. I remember looking at the Vizark thinking that he was actually very good. Diddle-a-doo. I have not reviewed every army's data sheets and lists. No, I'm not God, unfortunately. Jamie, what unit type do you think we're missing most post-index? It's a good question. What unit type? Support characters, I think, is the big one. We have some, and the ones that we have are really good. So, like, you look at the Master of Executions, you look at Khorne. The support that they bring to a Berserker unit is phenomenally good. We just need a little bit more variety. We need something that can attach to Terminators. We need something that can attach to 8-band that isn't a cavalry unit. But obviously, in my opinion, the unit that we're missing the most is that cavalry unit. This kind of hard-hitting unit that is very clearly meant to be the thing that kills heavy anti-infantry. Because I think right now, it's supposed to be the 8-band, and I don't really think it's kind of working. But yeah, it's a good question. I think we're missing a few things. Fly, in general. The lack of fly in our codex really at all is just very apparent. So, yeah, I feel like that kind of area is missing as well. What else is going on? You didn't see any Terminator lists first. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. What do I think about Terminators? I think they are goodish. This is my problem with the Terminators, right? I feel like the Terminators and the Exalted 8-band are fighting to fill the same niche. And while you get more Terminators, obviously, for points than Exalted 8-band, so 360 versus 390, I just really love the Exalted 8-band for doing what I think the Terminators want to do a lot of the time. I think they're really good for killing, like, marine bodies and stuff like that, but... And it's not to say that they're not viable, because they definitely are. They definitely are viable. It's just such a great indication of where the whole like 5 or 10 model part of this whole thing of the way 10th edition is going. It actually really hurts it, because if you could bring 8 Terminators, they'd be so good. They're so good. 10 Terminators are going to overkill like so many things, and 5 Terminators won't get the job done. 8 would have been the magic number, and you just can't do it. I do think their firepower is interesting. Obviously, free war gear, which is dumb. Just load them up with combi weapons and hopefully do a bunch of mortal wounds randomly, I guess. But I think they are interesting. I think they have to be rapid ingressed, so you have to bake that CP cost into their sort of overall unit value. And I think when they come in, they have the capacity to just do a ton of damage. So I don't dislike them. I just think Exalted 8-band do better in the role where they are. So... what else is going on? How about running 3 squads of Terminators from L? It's a big commitment. It's more than half your list, but it might if you push hard with 3 squads of Terminators, so I guess you Invocatus 2 of them to scout in the first turn, and you maybe auto 6 advance the other one. That could be a pressure build. Yeah, I don't hate that. I don't hate that. Have I read Scarbrand's data sheet? Yeah, it's dumb that he does more damage than Angron. Dan, thank you so much for the 5, homie. Really appreciate the £5. Thanks for the list review. What would I change about the list? Split the Zerks into 5 or remove some 8-bound for a Land Raider? I don't think you want to split the Zerks in your list. I think what I would actually do in your list specifically is I wouldn't necessarily mess around with taking out units. What I would actually do is I would combine some of the 8-bound squads into a bigger 8-bound squad. So I'd have a 6-man and a 3-man rather than a whole bunch of 3-mans, because I think that 6-man, you can kind of use it as a unit that one of the Juggernaut guys can attach to potentially, and also use it as a unit that you can reliably put stratagems on and it's going to do the damage then. So when you juice up a unit of 8-bound like that, they become an excellent bodyguard unit for 1, they become a good target for stratagems for 2, and 3rd, they will just do a decent amount of damage because it's a big unit of them. They also become more survivable, obviously, as there's more of them. It's harder to kind of put the resource in to kill them and stuff, so I think that's probably what I would change the most about your list. I think aside from that, maybe the Juggernaut Lord feels a little bit lost in the list. Possibly dilute him down into a Master of Executions, and then maybe consider if the points left over from that could take out the spawn and get some more 8-bound in one of the other squads. Or that's kind of where my thought process might be. The World Eater type Apothecary, I think he is actually coming. I think he was like soft confirmed on Warhammer Community. What else is going on? Lots of people talking about Terminators. Ronan, more of a hobby question, but what is the best that I've found or heard to get models back to bare plastic for repainting? Dettol works really well for me, but it stinks really bad. So I would always do it outside or in the shed or something like that. I think in America you can get something called Simple Green, which I believe does a similar enough job. But here in Europe we use Dettol, and you leave it in there. I think I left a bunch of Space Marines in there for about a day and a half, 2 days, and then just kind of scrubbed the shit out of them, and pretty much all the paint came off. It took a while for them to dry. After that, I just left them out in the sun for a couple of days, and yeah, they were fine then. So that'd be my best suggestion for stripping models. Boom. That is that. So yeah, if anyone else has any more questions before we finish up on the stream, we can. But yeah, I think, as I'm saying, overall, World Eater's in probably a good position from what I've seen from the other factions. I've looked at points for Craftworld Eldar, which seem incredibly cheap, I think, for a lot of what they're doing. Very, very cheap. And Tyranids, which seem either very cheap or very expensive, depending on sort of where it goes. Tyranids are a weird one, I think. And then looking at like Death Guard and Thousand Sons, which sort of seem in the same kind of ballpark as us in terms of how they've been valued, which leads me to believe that maybe they were tested together. Then you look at Space Marines, which is an interesting one because a lot of the Space Marine stuff does appear to be undercosted. And then some of it, like the Sanguinary Guard, ridiculously overcosted. Like, I'm laughing at Sanguinary Guard costing 42 points a model. It's very, very expensive. So I think overall, and like I say, I haven't gone through all the factions in detail, only the ones that my friends play, but it just seems inconsistent, I think is the word that I would use to describe the division of points across armies. It seems like there's a lot of things that don't really add up. They don't make sense when you compare them to each other. Like some of the Chaos Knight stuff, for example, the Brigands at 150 is incredibly cost efficient. And I'm not really sure how they kind of arrived at that point when a Forge Fiend is 150 as well. It just feels that little bit worse. So yeah, I think the inconsistency is really noticeable, not so much internally within a faction, but externally when you compare them to other factions. As I said, the Fire Prison being cheaper than the Predator is one that really jumps out as quite interesting. And the Ravager at 95 points with 3 las cannon equivalent guns, fly, deep strike, and the ability to get full rerolls as well. Certainly potent. Yeah. Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and Elves. That's who to fear. I'd believe it. I would believe it. A Wyvern being 90 points. I heard they were incredibly cheap. Aren't they cheaper than Basilisks, which are just worse as well? Very strange. Yeah. So I think overall, I'm like disappointed in the points. I think that across the board, they didn't really look at it hard enough. I think points are going to have to be readdressed fairly swiftly. Desolation Marines, I think 210 points for a unit of 10 is going to bust the ass out of the meta for a little while. It's going to be quite painful to play against Marines, I think. But yeah, overall though, it's just going to be silly season for at least 3 months at the start of 40k, which at that point I would say, now that we have the full picture, everyone was saying wait for the points, wait for the points. We've waited for them. They don't make a crazy amount of sense. But here we are. And we now know that the first 3 months of 40k are going to be hectic. They're going to be unusual, imbalanced, I would say, and quite wild. And you can kind of come at that from a point of view of like, I'm going to have fun with that. I'm going to try some weird things that are only going to be around now, because soon these things are going to be addressed and fixed. If you want to try 3 Lords of Skulls, this is the time to do it. If you want to mess around with Angron and tons of 8-pound, go for it. Because people are going to be running very, very strange things. Because everything is very strange right now. And the game fundamentally needs to be tweaked and adjusted quite a lot before we can kind of get back in line at something that I would call a balanced game state. Obviously, we haven't seen any tournaments yet. This is all conjecture. This is all hypothesis. We're going to know a lot more once we actually start playing games and getting reps in and stuff. But from the outset, I think that we're looking at a very imbalanced game, which also looks like a very funny game. So my suggestion would be, don't take it too seriously, at least for the first few months. Don't take it too seriously. Mess around, paint up some units that like are on your desk or in your backlog or whatever, and don't focus too hard on the games. If you are playing games, if you are playing tournaments like myself, bring something fun that you're going to enjoy using, and that like you're not going to feel too bad if you don't do well. If you're going to a tournament with the intention of winning, I think you need to be looking at bringing something that is particularly busted, because I think at the very, very top tables, that's all you're going to see is very strange interactions, very strange armies that don't really make a lot of sense. And I think that we have to kind of think about all that in terms of where you want to be in a tournament. Turnstone Jimmy, thank you so much for the 10. Good stream. Thanks for all the input on the first week of releases. Well, look, we're going to have a whole lot more content tomorrow. I have a very interesting video dropping. I'll give you folks in the stream a little bit of a teaser. If you like Death Guard, or if you like Thousand Sons, imagine putting together a Death Guard player, a World Eaters player, and a Thousand Sons player, and having them discuss everything and see what would happen. So that could be coming out tomorrow, which could be quite an interesting video. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, I think for now, it's very important to make sure that you're playing the game and enjoying it as much as you possibly can. So I would say evaluate where you want to be placing yourself in a tournament. Do you want to win a tournament? If you do, you need to look at the reality of the situation, which is that you might have to bring some very, very busted things to win a tournament these days. I think the 8-bound rush is definitely possibly something to look at if you're in that position. If you want to hang out in the middle tables and just have some fun, or even on the bottom tables or whatever, want to go to a tournament for the first time, bring something that is fun to you. You know, you can bring a very average World Leaders list, and because of the inherent power of our rules, you can do quite well with it. You can very easily go 2 and 3, very easily go 3 and 2 with any of the lists. Well, okay, maybe not Tibble's like double Land Raider and double Lord of Skulls, or Jamie's weird gunline car park list. Maybe those lists wouldn't do as good unless you're a very skilled person who understands how they work. But bring any of the other lists that we talked about today, or something else that you've come up with yourself, because there's a whole sandbox to play around with. And you can easily hit that 3 and 2. I've got some fun stuff cooking in the pot, and I deliberately didn't put any list that I was working on in here because I'm not really necessarily sure if I'm kind of where I'm at in terms of like how I'm feeling about the aesthetic of our army right now and what I kind of want my list to look like. So once I have a better picture, once I sit down with the book for a little bit longer, I'll have some cool stuff to talk about. But yeah, I think that's kind of where it is at the minute. So just make sure that you're getting the fun that you want out of the game. Rin, thank you so much for the 10. Really appreciate it. You're going to be running the Triumvirate. Nice. Yeah, I mean, look, the Incarn looks phenomenally good. Talking about fun lists. Talking about fun lists. Tibbles, you're here. I'm so sorry, Tibbs. Sorry, just seeing you come in, homie. You just missed me bashing your list. But yeah, so talking about fun lists, here's a very, very silly one, right? So my buddy Kean, a veteran 40k player, got into it at the same time as me, has played largely Craft Worlds and Nids and Dark Eldar. His first list of ninth, and this is the epitome in my mind of fun shit to mess around with. And Rin, you're going to love this one. The list is, very simply, 2 Wraith Knights, the Avatar of Khorne, the Avatar of Yniad, 40 Guardians, and 3 D-Cannons. You can run the Avatar of Khorne and the Avatar of Yniad in the same list together, and we worked out that there could be a situation in which the Avatar of Khorne throws the Wailing Doom, kills Angron, who dies, turns into the Avatar of Yniad, and then respawns in the next turn. So we were talking about running a triple Lord of Skulls and Angron list against that list and just how fun it would be. And I think if you approach the edition currently, at least, from that sort of point of view of like, let's do some silly shit like that. Let's come up with absolutely wild zany lists that we would never be able to do other than right now, because I guarantee you a lot of this stuff is going to be tweaked. We're going in with a blank slate and GW is going to pile things on. They're going to remove the ability to bring specific things in the way that they are. There's going to be force organization at some point because there isn't any right now. So go crazy while you can right now. Just go absolutely bananas with your list building. Bring some funny stuff and make the most of this point in time. Snake, thank you so much for the 10. Thanks for the content. Keep the inspiration going. Well, look, I don't claim to be inspiring, but and I certainly wouldn't recommend too much of my suggestions. But hey, I'm just here trying to put a little bit of a positive spin on everything that we're going into, do some analysis, and also kind of look at all the fun stuff. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I think we're going to kind of start closing out the end of the stream. So if you've been hanging out, thank you so much for watching. I've been Dara. You've been watching The Red Path. If you want more of our content, there's a bunch of links in the description down below. Discord, I would absolutely push Discord if you're not already there. Hop on in. There's a constant communication going, constant chatter about lists, about ideas, models, painting, etc., etc. It's all going on there, and I thoroughly recommend joining that community. We've also got a Twitch. We stream on Mondays and Thursdays. It's mostly hobby stuff there, so if you're more into the painting side of things, you can catch me there on Monday and Thursday. Spotify, we have a whole bunch of interview stuff going on, and Patreon, we might have some fun announcements coming out for that pretty soon. Like I say, all the links are down below. Obviously, there's YouTube's coming out, or YouTube videos coming out all the time. But yeah, I've been Dara. You've been watching The Red Path. Thank you so much for hanging out, chat. Thank you so much for all the super chats. Really appreciate that support. It goes a long way in keeping the channel going and all that good stuff. And if you've just been chatting away, if you've just been watching and not chatting, I appreciate you being here. It is fantastic for all of us, and it's been a ton of fun. But yeah, until the next one, folks,